cultures felt about owls. I'm being recorded. Okay. Got it. There we go. So I will jump into it here. Let me share my screen. Make sure everybody can see it okay. And make sure I have the presenter view. All right, are we seeing owls through the ages here?
Yeah.
Excellent. And I'm going to have my little funky laser pointer. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So yeah, you mentioned that a lot of people really like owls, and in this culture, we definitely do. But there are a lot of places around the world where people really don't like owls, and there's very little in between. And what is it about owls? Honestly, why did you guys come in and decide to be part of this program? And a lot of the answers I get about that are things like they're mysterious. And that's absolutely correct. When we see an owl, we don't usually get to see it very well. We see it in a silhouette. This is a short-eared owl sitting on a fence post out in Washington. We might walk past them and not see them. I mean, they have incredible camouflage here, and that cryptic nature definitely helps make owls more mysterious. And people tend to be either drawn to or afraid of things we don't understand. This is an eastern screech owl sitting in a knothole in a tree. Now, I know a lot of the pull for people liking owls is they are cute. I mean, let's be honest, this is adorable. They are very expressive, and humans tend to like animals that are really expressive, because so are we. I mean, we've got these really expressive faces here. Owls can be very loving. This is a pair of Ural owls doing what's called allopreening. They're preening each other's faces. This is this is actually our oldest owl, a great horned owl named Alice. She saw an osprey up in the sky and she went, "I'm way too big and scary, don't eat me." And these are some baby Indian scops owls. Aww. Doing that cute little head bob thingy. Now, especially a lot of you in Audubon societies are pretty good with birds, right? Birds are excellent, and owls in general are pretty cool as well. How do we feel about these? Now, the kind of birdsy woodsy groups, I usually don't get as many issues with these animals, but our general public, we often get some pretty intense negative reactions to this slide, especially since I go from this cute one to this one with like, oh, scary snake, scary bat. And the thing we need to remember is that these animals aren't necessarily evil. Why do you think people would be afraid of a rattlesnake or of a bat?
Don't want to get bitten.
They don't want to get bitten. That's a really good point. And I mean, with bats as well. And that's one of the things people worry about. Bats carry rabies. Rattlesnakes are venomous. And one of the things that I like to bring up with snakes especially is that it's probably different with the snakes you have out in California, but we only have 2 species of venomous snakes in Minnesota. We have the Massasauga and the timber rattlesnake, and the timber is incredibly shy. And the last time somebody died from a timber rattlesnake bite in Minnesota was in like 1840, and that's when the cure for a snake bite was having them drink a bunch of alcohol and hoping they survive. So I don't know that it was necessarily the snake bite that killed them in that case. But, these animals don't get a great rep in, Western society, generally speaking. But I could go up to somebody in a different country and show them this slide, and they're like, "Cool, rattlesnakes are a symbol of rebirth. Bats are good luck." And I show them this, and they're like, "Nope, I don't want anything to do with that. Owls are an omen of death." So it just kind of depends on how we were raised. Now, humans and owls have a really long shared history. Humans, as we are today, it's debated, but we say that humans have been around 2 to 400,000 years as Homo sapiens. The earliest known owl fossil, this isn't the earliest one, but it's a pretty cool example of it. The earliest known owl fossil is from about 60 to 70 million years ago. So humans and owls have really had a long time to get to know each other. Um, and with owls being distributed all over the world, everybody's got something to say about them. They are in cultural history everywhere. And some of those beliefs have changed over time, and some of them have not. Now, living around humans is not always the best. In this day and age, humans are the biggest threat to owls everywhere, pretty much. Most of the time, or at least in this culture, we don't hurt owls on purpose. Sometimes they'll get caught in barbed wire. Sometimes they'll get electrocuted. There's 2 owls in here. There's actually one up here as well. But these aren't things that we do on purpose, right? We're not putting up barbed wire to hurt owls. We're not putting up power lines to hurt owls. These are just things that happen as a side effect of living around people. But sometimes people will intentionally harm owls. This is a scene from a train station in China in 2008 where some people called the authorities, and they came out and they found 44 live eagle owls, that's bigger than a great horned owl, wrapped up in towels in the back of somebody's car. And where were they headed? We have no idea. They ended up unwrapping the owls and letting them go right there at the train station, which probably wasn't great for the local ecosystem, but it was better for the owls than it could have been. The owls might have been intended to go to the black market in India or Nepal. We don't know what they were intended for, but it may not have been a good thing. This is a fetish market in Togo in West Africa. You can see a lot of animal parts in here, and there are some dead barn owls down in the corner here. And if you talk to the people running the stands, they say, oh, it's for tourists. Have any of you gone outside the country before? Can you take this stuff with you? No. So if you dig a little bit deeper, it turns out to be for black magic and witchcraft, and this is a really big deal in a lot of places. And because humans are an owl's biggest threat, it also means that we can be their biggest hope. And understanding cultural beliefs regarding owls is a really, really important part of owl conservation. And that's why this presentation isn't just all the nice, happy, fluffy stuff. It's important stuff to talk about as well. So all current cultural beliefs are rooted in the history of a culture. Witchcraft is very much alive and well in Senegal, which includes beliefs about owls. And sometimes we think, well, that's kind of silly. Well, let's look at our beliefs about owls, shall we? Does that make any more sense necessarily? No. But all cultures have some kind of belief about owls. While they were doing these surveys, they could not find a single country that didn't have any beliefs about owls. They all had at least something to say about them. And we're not the only people who think so. Even 30,000 years ago, this is a finger painting from some of the oldest cave art in the world, from a cave in France from about 30,000 years ago. So this is supposed to be a long-eared owl looking over its shoulder. Notably, there's another painting of a snowy owl in one of the close-by caves, and this is interesting to me because if you've ever been to France, it's too hot there for snowy owls. So it would have had to have been much colder at the time that they made these cave paintings. And, around that time, they would have been focused mostly on survival. Let's not get eaten by a tiger. Let's make sure we find enough food. So the fact that they carved out a little bit of time to make art and make art of owls tells us that the owl must have been at least interesting to them, if not important. Owls in China, this is a bronze wine vessel. They date it back to about 1200 BC, and these were found all over the place. There are quite a few of these wine vessels that they've found. We're not really sure what it was meant for. They assume it was for a wine vessel, but it was made out of bronze, which was very difficult to work with and very expensive. And the fact that they made a bunch of these and they were found all over China tells us that this owl must have been important to them in some respect. Now, if you or anybody you know is into Egyptology, owls show up in the hieroglyphs as well. So an owl could represent either an owl, obviously, or the sound of the letter M. And notably, this is one of the only hieroglyphs that is facing the viewer. Almost all of the other ones are looking to the side. So interesting. I mean, that may be just because they have their eyes in the front of their heads, but so do people, and they were facing to the side too. Go figure. Now we come to Athena. Who is Athena? Anybody know?
Goddess.
A goddess? Yep, she was a Greek goddess of war and wisdom. So you can see she's got a helmet on her head up here and a little owl. And when I say a little owl, that is actually a species of owl they have over in Europe called the little owl. They're related to our burrowing owls. So if you lived in ancient Greece and you wanted to be wise, you could pray to Athena. If you wanted to be successful in battle, you could pray to Athena. And if you were an artist and you wanted to remind people of Athena, but you couldn't make a human figure very well, you could make an owl because that was kind of her symbol. So in the middle here we have a terracotta scent bottle we think was used for perfumes. Lower right is a bowl or a wine vessel for drinking parties. So maybe you'd drink this and then you'd go out and kill your enemies. Yay! And then up in the right corner is their tetradrachma coin. And this owl was important enough that they put it on their money. Now, if any of you have been to Greece in the last, I guess, 100 years, which would be, the last time anybody went to Greece, this representation of an owl is still found on the Greek euro today. It's very small, but it is still there. And that's especially impressive to me given everything that happened in between. Like the Romans, who had a tendency to kind of steamroll everything. So the Romans took over. They renamed a lot of the great gods and goddesses. So Athena became Minerva, and this was the owl of Minerva. And she was still the goddess of war and wisdom, and she still had an owl with her. And a lot of the Western world is descended from Europeans. So this is probably where our ideas of owls being wise came from. Now, shifting over to books, in the Bible, I'm a brother to dragons and a companion to owls. When Job said that, he was not in a great place. It sounds great to me. I like dragons and owls, but this is not something that he was necessarily having a good time at. And then in Leviticus, I can talk today. Let me drink some water here. That's better. In Leviticus, there are birds you're not supposed to eat because they're considered unclean. This is just one of the examples. They have really wide varieties of birds that show up in these different translations of this book. But let's see, what do we have in here? Kite, another kite, raven, horned owl, screech owl, little owl, great owl, white owl, desert owl. There's a lot of owls in there. So good for the owls, because they're not getting eaten, but they're considered unclean. So that's probably not a great thing in terms of how people felt about them. And combined with this part tells us that they didn't really think owls were super great at that point. Now, the Mayans had a deity called God El. We're not sure if he was an owl or a hawk, but he was some kind of raptor. Or this could be a representation of a leader they had named Spear Thrower Owl, who was a real person. They date this back to 600 to 900 AD in Mexico. There's a picture from Central America, not super sure what this was meant for. The prevailing ideas was that it was either for water or burial ashes, which are not particularly similar in my book, but that's what they thought. We did have a woman visit the Owl Center a while ago, actually, from the area this picture was from, and she said she thought it was more likely for water because it had this kind of a spout. And then a hat from a modern day people in Chile called the Mapuche. And we didn't have a ton of information on this piece until a few years ago. We were actually visited by a family from Chile. And so we asked them about this hat. We're like, what's going on here? And they said, okay, so this looks like feathers from an owl, and the only owl big enough to have these feathers would be the Magellanic horned owl, which is like a smaller version of our great horned owl. And the fur on the back is fur from probably some kind of fox. And they said this hat is something that you would wear when you were doing something really important. This is kind of a ceremonial hat. This isn't a hat that you would just wear out and about because you felt like it, because it was a nice fashion piece or something like that. They were wearing this because they really had to do something important in their lives. Now, just curious, show of hands, do we have any art buffs in the crowd? Oh, quite a few of you. Do any of you know who this artist was? Any guesses? No? This is Hieronymus Bosch, which is a great name. Bosch was a 14th century Dutch artist, and almost every single one of his paintings is as weird as this one. There's my stick, my glow pointier thingy. So this particular piece is called The Garden of Earthly Delights, and it's this huge 3-panel. I'm doing this because I can't lean back any farther and show you exactly how big it is. But it's this huge 3-panel piece that supposedly shows the fall of man. So a lot of his paintings were very allegorical. But interestingly enough, almost every painting he did has an owl in it somewhere. Why? We don't know. Nobody asked him, or if they did, they didn't write it down. So on the left side, we've got paradise. Things are pretty good. Things are happy. In the middle, they're doing all kinds of weird things to each other, debauchery and sin and all that fun stuff. And then over on the right side, we've got hell. That's pretty allegorical. There are actually 4 owls in this particular piece. So we've got a small owl sitting in a fountain here. Cute. So good, there's owls in paradise. That's a good sign. There's a giant tawny owl getting a hug. Aww. That's totally something I would do. We've got a barn owl here with the craziest whiskers I've ever seen. I guess artist interpretation. And the weirdest one, which you can actually buy figurines of on the internet, is this one. And I'm not sure what these ladies are doing with the owl on their head, but they seem to be enjoying it. So to each their own, I guess. Notably, there aren't any owls in hell, so that's a good thing. I mean, at least they're on the positive side of neutral. So moving over to the Columbia River Valley in Oregon and Washington, which I gather is not too far away from you guys. They're in an area called the Dalles. They have some rocks with carvings on them along the river. They're petroglyphs. And they call the 2 on the ends the Speedus owl. And the one in the middle, they consider to be a water devil. Now, the reason for these carvings is not entirely clear. There's a couple of guesses. One possibility is that the owls were meant to denote fishing rights. So if this family fished in a certain area, they could put the owl and say, you guys can't fish here. That's one possibility. The other idea is if you're standing in the river and you're fishing and you feel a little tug on your foot, a little undercurrent, that would be a water devil trying to drown you. And maybe the owls were meant to protect people from water devils. So we don't have really any good ideas one way or the other, but that's kind of an interesting one. Unfortunately, in the 50s, this area of the Columbia River was flooded because they were damming up part of the river. So if you want to see these, you do have to go to a museum. You can't see them out in the wild, so to speak, anymore. Also out in Washington State, when some of these ancient volcanoes erupted, they left these big vertical lava tubes. And I don't know if those show up. Hi, my cat just showed up, speaking of which. I don't know if those volcanoes show up in northern California as well, but they left these big vertical lava tubes, and people with a much different idea of fun than me like to go climbing around in them. To each their own, I guess. Hello, can you not? Thank you. That was Gizmo. You can leave me alone right now. Thanks. So anyway, somebody was climbing around in these lava tubes, and one day they found drawings of barn owl faces, a lot of them, on the walls inside these lava tubes. Like, what on earth is going on here? Why are there so many drawings of owls on the inside of these lava tubes? And they had no idea. So they came out and they talked to the native people living in the area, and the traditional belief is that owls are they're not animals, they're spirits, and they're such powerful spirits that they're too much for a normal person to even look at, or it will destroy our soul. So, sorry. But if you were a shaman, owls would be in the realm of shamans. And if you were a shaman and you wanted to give yourself some of the powers of an owl, like moving quietly or seeing well in the dark or something like that, you could go down into one of these lava tubes and draw it down there. Why would you want to go down there when you could just do it on a tree or on a rock outside somewhere? Well, if you're a shaman, you're also kind of in charge of the well-being of the rest of your village. So you probably don't want to do this where regular people can come across it and destroy themselves by accident. So they had to be really, really determined to do this, because this was several thousands of years ago. You know, they didn't have complicated climbing gear. They didn't have a headlamp. These lava tubes are not very big, just barely big enough for a person to go down in. So they had to really, really want to do this. Now, the location of this has not been released, because we know what happens to things like this when people find them. Because people are great. Moving over to Australia, this is one of the few places owls are seen as a creator being. So Gogolmot is the stone owl. You can see him on the right side of this photo here. He's pretty big compared to the person standing here. So Gogolmot was said to create the landscape and then become part of the landscape. And because of that, the people there are supposed to take care of the land, which makes a lot of sense. And this is a very sacred site. Gogolmot was said to be very, very powerful. And the people say they can go there and feel the spirits of their ancestors at this site. So this is a really powerful, very spiritual site. Unfortunately, why is there always an unfortunately? About 500 meters this way is a stone quarry, and a company's been coming in and using explosives to mine away some of the stone. And as you can imagine, that's making people very angry, and they're trying to keep these mining companies from, making enough vibrations that the head comes off. Because if your god's head falls off, that's bad. You're not just putting that back up. That's a very bad thing. Now, the company has an injunction. They can't get any closer than, I think, 250 meters, but that's still pretty close if you're using TNT. So that is still happening. There's another site elsewhere in Australia, I think it's north central Australia, called the Gourd Owl site in the Wardaman tribal area. This one is another very sacred site. It's a stone outcropping, and apparently also looks like an owl. And the guy that I was mentioning at the beginning, David Johnson, he went to that site. He was one of the few white people who was allowed to go to that site in north central Australia. And this place is considered incredibly sacred. Not a lot of people get to go there. It's called the birthplace of mankind. And David asked the people who were in charge of keeping this place safe if he could take some pictures of this stone owl for the program. And they said, sure, go ahead and take your pictures. And he did. He took a bunch of pictures, came back and had them developed. This was back when we had slide film instead of digital. And all of those pictures came back blank. So there still aren't any pictures of that. Interesting. Now, talking about shamanism and witchcraft, this is a really big deal in a lot of places. On the left here, we have the cover of a textbook from a community college in Russia, where you can go to school to learn how to be a shaman, which I think is a great idea. You know, you got your plumbers and your auto mechanics and your shamans and your electricians and all those useful everyday trades. Works out pretty well. And I believe this book, you could actually buy it on Amazon until like 2008. So I just think that's kind of an interesting combination here. The woman on the right, David actually met her at an airport in Barcelona. And he was going around the world to talk to people about their work, their beliefs about owls. And out of the most amazing coincidences, they both happened to be going to an endangered species conference in Barcelona. And he said, she must be really important. She's got this big headpiece. She's surrounded by a bunch of people. I want to ask her how her culture feels about owls. So he came up to her, and all of these people came in between them. She had an entourage. And he managed to find a couple of people who spoke a little bit of English, so we don't have a ton of translation going on here. But it turns out that she is a highly revered practicing shaman in Mongolia. And when he asked her how her culture feels about owls, she said, well, you know, we don't have a lot of really distinctive beliefs about owls necessarily, but at the top of one of the mountains there's supposed to live an owl spirit. So once a year, we have a retreat. All of us shamans, we have a retreat to go and visit the owl spirit. But it's a women-only mountain. Guys can't go to it. So sorry, guys, you can't go to the owl mountain. But she turned around to walk away, and he noticed that she had these feathers in her hat. He's like, wait, I got to ask about these. What's going on? What's with the feathers? They look like owl feathers. And they turn out to be flank feathers from the sides of the leg of the eagle owl. And to call these feathers good luck charms is a really shallow way of putting it. They're meant to bring health and prosperity and happiness and all these really powerful, positive things. So they put these feathers on everything. This is way more than one owl's worth of feathers on this traditional wedding hat, so hopefully they'll have a very happy marriage. These articles are usually passed down through the generations, so who knows how old these feathers are. They put them on little kids' hats as a baby sitting in front of a genuine yurt. They put them on their motorcycle handlebars so you don't crash. And so these feathers are used all over the place. And when David asked the shaman where they get the feathers, she said, well, we used to have to go out and shoot the owls when we needed to get more, but we don't have to do that now. Now we just walk underneath the power lines and pick up the dead ones. Ooh, which is better? I mean, I guess they're using the ones that are already dead, but it actually turns out that 40% of eagle owl deaths in Europe and Asia is from electrocution. And part of that's because they're really big owls. They can touch two wires at once. And partly because in a lot of these developing countries, they don't necessarily care how safe electricity is for birds. They're just trying to get it where it needs to go. So they might pack the wires really close together. All right, moving over to Africa and Burkina Faso. They have a festival once a year where they come out and they dance throughout the weekend. 4 animals come into the village here. In the front, we've got a gazelle with a really long horn, and I am really impressed with the neck strength of whoever's wearing this mask. And then next we have a Cape buffalo, and then there are 2 owls. What an interesting choice for animals. Why are there two owls and only one of the others? We're not really sure. Now, the owl's job is apparently to dance all weekend long and scare away the spirits of the people who have died in the past year. So that does seem like a pretty important job. Also in parts of Africa, when you think of poaching, what do we think of? Things like elephants, rhinoceros, lions, the big impressive animals. You don't think of owls. But it turns out that in certain parts of Africa, like Kenya and Uganda, owl eggs are actually worth more on the black market than their weight in gold, rhino horn, or ivory. Why? Because somebody started a rumor that owl eggs are a cure for cancer, or AIDS, depending on who you talk to. Now, does it work? No, or it would be all over the news. And interestingly enough, not a ton of people know that this is happening. Virtually the only people who live in these areas, let me start that sentence over again. Virtually the only people who know about this are the shamans who are prescribing the eggs, anybody who might need one of these cures, the people who are researching owls, which is not a ton of people, and whoever their runners are, whoever goes out to get the eggs. So the vast majority of the population has no idea this is a problem, and it's really hard to fix a problem that nobody knows about. So these researchers have really wrestled with this for quite a long time. They're wondering, how do we make people more aware of this? And they thought about putting out an ad on the radio saying, this is an issue. People are paying thousands of dollars for a cure that doesn't work. They're wasting their money on it. They're not going to get the health care they need, and it's bad for the environment. And there are going to be quite a lot of people who hear that and say, okay, we need to do something about that. But there's going to be a significant portion of the population that say, I didn't know you could get a bunch of money by selling owl eggs. So they have to approach it really, really carefully. And this is actually still going on. We've gotten emails from people in both Kenya and Uganda saying, I have some owl eggs. I heard you're interested in owls. Would you like to buy them? And interesting. And we don't respond to them. We usually forward them to our contact in Uganda, who sends them to the appropriate authorities. One of them, nothing happened with it, but the other one, the guy actually got indicted and he got arrested. So that was cool. Turns out he was a pastor. So he was a very important person in the community. So this is still happening. In certain parts of India, there are people who live, there are squatters. They're not, they don't own this land. They don't have a ton of money. And they go out and they use owl eggs in gambling. Now, we've got casinos in the US, people play bingo. You've got your lucky socks. Maybe you have a rabbit's foot or a lucky penny that you carry around with you to make sure you're good luck. And they've got their lucky owl eggs. And to make sure that they're lucky, they have to get these eggs in a really specific way. Because if they do it wrong, they're not going to be lucky. So they go out into these forests. They're teak forests. They are managed forests, so they're not supposed to be cutting down trees. But they go into the forest. They try and find owl nests. And they take the eggs. If they find babies in the nest, they just eat them. Don't let them go to waste. They take the eggs back to the campsite. They put them on the ground. They scrape the soot off the bottom of a cooking pot onto the eggs, cover them with the pot overnight, and then whatever numbers the shamans can read on the eggs in the morning are the lucky numbers for the day. And then they go and gamble. Now, is that any sillier than lucky socks? Not necessarily, but unfortunately, what makes it worse is that they use whatever owl eggs they can find, but the owls that are found in that area of the forest are the forest owlet, which is endemic to India, so it's not found anywhere else. And up until 1994, it was considered to be extinct. So they're using endangered owl eggs for gambling. Yeah. Now, this is not trying to be all doom and gloom. There are people who are working with the public in these parts of India to try and help the owls. We actually give out our World Owl Hall of Fame awards, every year, and this past year we gave one to Dr. Prachi Mehta, who is an owl researcher in India. And she does work with both the owls and the locals, the people who live in these areas. And she teaches them about owls, but she also teaches them how to make owl-themed handicrafts, like pot holders and bags and keychains and things that they can sell. So they're supplementing their income, so they don't have to go out and take these eggs and use them for gambling. There's also a fair amount of ecotourism happening, which has its own drawbacks, but it's better than killing the eggs. So it is a good start. Let's see here. They did do these programs, these interviews all over the world. They interviewed 150 people in Belize. And something they noticed when they were doing these interviews was that if you have a country or a part of the world that has not had a lot of change, a lot of political turmoil, they're going to hold on to traditional beliefs pretty closely because, there hasn't been a lot of new information coming in. And in Belize, the conquistadors never made it up there. So they've had a lot of time to hold on to those beliefs. And one of those beliefs is that owls are omens of death. Now, that could be good or bad depending on the situation. If you see an owl when you're sitting at home and cooking or knitting or doing housework or whatever, that's bad. That means somebody in your home will get sick or die. But if you're out hunting, you're walking through the woods and you're trying to find a deer or something to kill so you can feed your family, and you see an owl, great. That's excellent news. That means you're going to be successful. So it depends on the situation. Something else they noticed when they did these interviews was places that had a negative belief about owls, you're not going to find much in the markets with owl stuff, which makes sense. If you really like somebody and you think an owl is an omen of death, are you going to get them an owl thing? No. So in all of the markets they checked in Belize, they found 2 things with owls on them. And one of them was made in China. So I don't know that necessarily counts. Let's see here. So it is kind of hard to think about, but in some places, beliefs are really, really deeply held. There was actually a woman who worked at the Belize Zoo for 20 years trying to change people's beliefs about owls, and she's had 0 effect. But there is hope. We just like to have this. These are baby pictures of 2 of our birds. Ruby is the cute little one peeking out from behind her brother. There is hope. Humans are capable of changing our beliefs. For example, lest we be smug about having superior cultural attitudes, let's look at our own history. We don't bury people in rocks and suffocate them or burn them or hang them as witches anymore. Now we think about little kids dressing up for Halloween. That's a big shift. That's a pretty major change. An example that does have to do with owls is this restaurant in Iran. So boof is the word for a large owl, like a great horned or an eagle owl. And traditionally in Iran, the belief is that owls are omens of death. Older folks say owls are bad luck and they're bad omens. Somebody is going to get sick and die. If an owl stays long enough around your house, the house will turn to ruins. Now, mostly they have small owls in Iran, and they often nest in really kind of tumble down buildings. So I can see where that belief comes from, but most of the younger generations at least, don't believe that anymore. They say, oh, owls are kind of interesting, actually. Let's have a restaurant named after owls. And you'd kind of think that if you really honestly thought an owl was an omen of death, you probably wouldn't make a restaurant named after it. Because nobody would eat there, right? Huh. Moving over to Nepal, this is one of those places where they don't have a lot of specific beliefs about owls. So if a culture doesn't have a lot of beliefs in one way or the other, it's kind of hard to make people care about something. Now, show of hands, I'm curious, how many of you have really strong feelings about turnips? Yeah, that's usually the kind of reaction I get. Like, whatever. So how many of you would go to a turnip festival? Maybe. Some people might be like, oh, that's kind of weird. Maybe I'll see what that's about. But most people are going to think, no, I'm not going to that. That sounds boring. I'm not going to see that. And that's exactly what Raju Akaria here in the corner came up against. He actually came to our owl festival in Minnesota one year, and he said, "This is cool. I want to take and do an owl festival in Nepal." But he came up against that problem that if people don't care about something, it's hard to make them care. So he wanted to have an owl festival, but he knew if he called it an owl festival, nobody was going to come to it. So he thought about it. He thought, what do people like to do? Everybody loves dancing. So let's have a cultural dance. He had a dance at the side of the dance. He had a little booth where people could learn about owls. He called it an owl festival. Most people came for the dancing, and some of them learned about owls at the same time. So that was pretty successful. So he held it again the next year. He moves it around every year to small rural areas, and some places are so rural he has to bring his own generator. And that's because rural areas tend to have more traditional beliefs than urban areas. And he pairs it with something that people want to go to. So maybe it's a dance, maybe it's some kind of food festival or something like that. Their biggest year, they actually had 10,000 people come through because they paired it with a health clinic. So people could get their shots and their checkups, and they would learn about owls at the same time. And it's gotten to the point now where people are coming just for the owl stuff. So it has been fairly successful. He does still pair it with things that people want to go to, but the owl part is getting bigger and bigger. And that's just a really neat way to go about it. Find something that people are interested in and pair it with what you want them to learn about. And actually, the Owl Center is doing a fall fundraiser this coming weekend, and part of the proceeds are going to go to the Nepal Owl Festival. So if you're interested in that, you can check out our website. That was a completely unplanned plug. My apologies. Moving back over to Kenya, this is one of those places owl eggs are worth a lot of money in the black market. Once again, the traditional belief is that owls are omens of death. So if you see one, you're supposed to stone it. Not great for owls. Now, Paul Morethi, for whatever reason, didn't buy into all the negative press that owls were getting. He loved science. He wanted to do research and stuff like that. He ended up being a farmer for a while, so he kept track of all the birds around his farm. And I'm sure some of you know what that's like. And that included a pair of endangered Mackinder's eagle owls. So he would keep an eye on them. He would kind of follow them, see where they went for the day. And some tourists showed up one day, and they said, "Paul, I've heard that you are the person to talk to if we want to see the Mackinder's eagle owl." And he said, "Yeah, let's go find them." He didn't know where they were that day, so he just kind of wandered around, and the tourists went with him, and they wandered around, and they eventually found the owls. And the tourist said, "Thank you for showing us. Here's some money." And he's like, "Oh, that's an idea." So he puts up the sign, "Come see the Mackinder's eagle owl." And tourists started showing up, and they would give him money. But instead of keeping all the money for himself, if he had to go through your land to get to the owls that day, you would get some of the money. His neighbors are thinking, well, maybe we shouldn't kill these owls. It's kind of in our best interest to keep the owls around. So it did start to flip people's behaviors, at least. Even if it didn't necessarily make them like owls, at least it was giving them a reason to not kill them. And that's a really good start, honestly. But this was only helping his immediate neighbors. And it got to the point where he was getting enough ecotourism that he was using the extra funding from the tourists to pipe fresh water down from the mountains, so his whole village had access to running water. So it ended up that these owls were a really positive force for change. And I always get goosebumps when I talk about that part because it's so cool It's just so interesting seeing how people can make a difference. And then the last one, this is in South Africa. And in South Africa, they have a lot of negative associations with owls. They are associated with black magic. There's in South Africa, they have black moti and white moti. We've got black magic, which is evil and curses and death and disease and all that nasty stuff, and white moti, which is happiness and health and prosperity and all the good stuff. Owls are associated with, surprise, black moti, meaning that, for example, if you really hated somebody and you want them to die, you can pay your shaman to bury an owl in that person's yard, and they will be cursed. Now, if you are that person and you find an owl buried in your yard, you're going to freak out for a little while, and then you're going to go to your shaman and pay him to take the curse off of you. And if you pay him a little extra, he will put the curse back on whoever did it. So it's good to be a shaman in South Africa. They have some kind of odd superstitions about owls. Like if you grind up an owl's feathers into a paste and you put it on your head, it will keep you from going bald. Or if you are bald, it'll grow some of your hair back. If you take the blood of an owl and make it into a soup, it will help you heal better. It will help you be more healthy. One of my favorites is if you put an owl's eyeball in a woman's hand while she's sleeping, when she wakes up, she won't tell any lies. Now, I don't know about you, but if I woke up with an eyeball in my hand, the first thing out of my mouth wouldn't be a lie either. But there'd probably be a lot of profanity going on. But that's the kind of thing that owl people are up against. Now, a little bit of backstory. In Johannesburg specifically, segregation isn't officially a thing anymore, but it's still very much a thing. And the center of Johannesburg is generally more affluent, and a lot of the people who live there are white. And the edges of the town they're called townships. They're basically slums. They're areas that people were never intended to live long term. And so a lot of these houses they're all very rickety, but a lot of them don't have electricity. A lot of them don't have running water. There's no garbage pickup, which means that there's a really big rat problem. And the problem is so bad that if mothers leave their babies alone for too long, they'll start to get eaten. So rats are a really big problem in these townships. So they use a lot of rodenticides. And they mix it with cornmeal to make it more appealing for the rats. They spread it on the floor. What else is crawling on the floor? Little kids. And what do kids do with things they find on the floor? They put it in their mouth. So there is a lot of poisoning of kids from rodenticides as well. Now, because there are so many rats, there are a ton of barn owls in these townships. And barn owls, for whatever reason, really like nesting in human structures. So they find these rickety old houses and they nest up in the ceilings. And they're really quiet, so people usually don't know that they're there until the owls have been there for so long, producing so many babies, so much poop, and so many pellets that the ceiling collapses. Now, if you suddenly had a bunch of baby owls running around in your living room, you probably wouldn't be thrilled about it. But you're probably not thinking, somebody wants me dead. Because if one dead owl buried in your yard is a bad thing, imagine how bad 5 to 8 live owls in your house is going to be. So the people who own these houses, they go to the city, and the city takes these baskets of baby owls to Jonathan Haw. He worked at an ecological pest control company. So basically they would go up to him, give him a basket of owls and say, here, do something about this. And he's like, there's nothing wrong with these owls. They just need to be raised and released. So he was trying to figure out how to help the owls and how to help the people in these townships, because they were having problems with rodenticides and just all kinds of things. And he realized that the barn owl territories in these townships were laid out a lot like the school districts. So he came up with the Township Owl Project. He came up with that idea. He went to the schools And he said, here's an idea for you. If you promise not to use rodenticides in your building or on your grounds, and you let me put up a hat box on the side of the building where the owls can live, I'll give you a freezer for the owls' food. And you can put your food in it too. You're not supposed to, but don't tell anybody. And the kids can help take care of the owls. And a lot of these schools were pretty poor. And they were like, all right, yeah, we don't own a freezer. Let's do this. This sounds great. So they put up the boxes, they put the baby owls in them, and the kids started taking care of the owls. Now, they did have to get signed permission forms to work with the owls, and a lot of the parents were like, no way, you cannot do this. But enough of the kids did that they started taking care of the owls. A lot of these families were so poor they'd never had a pet, so the kids are learning how to nurture something. And let's be honest, you can't hold a cute, fuzzy little baby owl and not immediately fall in love with it. They are adorable. Well, baby barn owls are more like little aliens, but you know where I'm going with this. So the kids, they really help learn. They're learning about owls. They're learning about their biology. They're learning. The older kids, you can see up here, are some high school students dissecting owl pellets from the wild owls. And they're finding out, oh, they're eating rats and 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 rats. Maybe they're actually helping us with this rat problem we have. So these kids are going home then and talking to their parents and their neighbors and their friends about how cool this project is, how amazing these owls are. And look, I'm not getting sick because I'm working with these owls. And nobody in my family is sick because I'm working with these owls. And it's just, they're becoming these amazing little owl ambassadors. And it's actually gotten to the point now where if somebody, this program's been going on for more than 20 years now. So if somebody's ceiling collapses at this point and there's a bunch of owls running around, instead of him and his mostly white staff going out into these predominantly black areas and being like, I am a figure of authority, you have to do what I say, they find the kids from that neighborhood and they send those kids out. And kids are really persuasive. So, you know, if you know a kid, they're going to tell you everything they think is interesting. So these kids are becoming these excellent little owl ambassadors. And I love ending on this picture in the lower right, because you got the owls and you got the kids and the owls have the same expression on their faces. And you know she's going to be a scientist someday because she's right up in there. They did interviews with the kids at the beginning of the program, and then again 20 years later. One of the girls who was interviewed, she was 16 when they started the program, and she said, my grandmother is convinced I'm a witch because I'm working with these owls. She knows that I'm going to die because I'm working with owls. And they interviewed her again 20 years later, and obviously she hadn't died. I believe she owned her own salon, so she was doing pretty well. And she said, the one thing I learned from that program was if you're afraid of something, it means you need to learn more about it, which is an excellent takeaway from anything. And it's just an interesting way to go about it. So that's where I like to connect it back to the snakes and the bats. Like if you're afraid of snakes, if you're afraid of bats, learn more about them. You don't have to go and touch them right away, but maybe read a book about them. You know, you guys are into birds, so I imagine a lot of those kind of critters don't worry you as much, but that's kind of what I have. So it just helps to start where people are. All right, that is what I had for the program. Kind of a stop at that point, but it is a lot of really interesting information about people all over the world with owls.
Well, thank you, Joe. Oh my gosh, you not only educated us quite a bit about owls all over the world, you also entertained us with great stories. So excellent program. I'm going to open up questions for the in-person folks. You have to yell out if you have a question, and then we'll go to questions on the chat. So does anyone have a comment or question for Joe on the owls of the world?
I know I threw a lot of information at you.
And we have to tell you, Joe, we do have lava tubes here. We're pretty close to Latin Volcanic National Park, and all over, all the way to Oregon, there's lava tubes, and we go explore. But maybe we get to start looking for the owl figures on the wall. Most of ours are horizontal, though.
Gotcha.
And do you have like a rehab area where you have injured owls?
Do we have an area where we have injured owls?
And you're rehabbing them?
A rehabbing. We don't have a rehab license. It's actually tremendously difficult to get a raptor rehab license in Minnesota. So there are not a lot of raptor rehabbers. So the closest rehabber to us is up in the Twin Cities, which is about 2.5 hours away. So people do call us all the time about injured birds. So we will go out and get them. We're allowed to hold them until we can transport them, but we can't actually do any of that care. But if any of our birds need any medical care, if it's more intensive than like beak and talon maintenance or some kind of mite treatment or like an eye infection or something like that, then we have to take them up to the Raptor Center.
So let's look at some of the questions or comments.
Fascinating. Super information. Thank you. Fascinating from another person. Thank you, Joe. Very interesting.
Yeah, it looks like most of the chat is just absolutely wonderful comments about your presentation. Okay, there's
I see that one.
Yeah, we have throughout the world.
The world of owl people is not that big. I will say, not every year, but every few years, there's a World Owl Conference, and that's put on in different parts of the world. Last year, or the last time it was held, was in India. The time before that was in Portugal. I believe it was in Argentina one time. And we're actually hosting the next one over in Wisconsin. So I'm very excited about that, but we're expecting maybe 200 people to come for that. So it's not a huge thing, but it's very, very interesting. And so if you're the type of person who's really into the research side of it, the scientific side of it, it is really worth looking into, because you get all kinds of insights. There is a ton of stuff that we don't know about owls. And a lot of that's because they're nocturnal. You don't see them very much and they're kind of hard to research. But like I said, there's not a ton of people working with owls throughout the world.
All right, there's a new question just popped up. Can you speak to your success with the Ukrainian children's art class?
Yeah. Once I get a little bit of water. Yeah, so when war first broke out in Ukraine earlier this year, we looked through our art contest entries. So every year we do, as part of our Festival of Owls, we do a kids art contest, and that's open to people from all over the world up to age 18. And every year we get several thousand entries. So we went through and we thought, I'm sure we've gotten entries from Ukraine, and we found 300 some pieces, and we put some of them on our Facebook page, just saying, think about the kids who made these, hope that they're doing okay. And there was such a tremendous response to that, and a lot of people said, can I buy these pieces? And we're like, yeah, we could do that. So we partnered with the I want to say it's an arts foundation in southern Minnesota, and we had an online auction of, I think it was the first 50 pieces of kids art from Ukraine, and that first auction got over $100,000 for UNICEF. It was astonishing. So we did it 2 more times,
I
and
didn't get any,
what was that?
I did bid on some of those, but I didn't
Oh,
get any.
all right. Yeah, some of those, the first round, I don't think there was anything under $1,000. It was pretty intense. So the first round went really well, and so we did it 2 more times. And for the total, I think it was $220,000 for UNICEF, and it was amazing to see the response for that. And we're just blown away by the generosity of people. That because there were so many people who didn't get a piece in the kids auction, because they were a bajillion dollars. Somebody asked if we could do prints, and so the next 2 auctions we had prints of a few of the pieces, and we still have some of those. So if you're interested in getting it's not an original, but a print of one of those art pieces, we do have those. I believe they're up in our online store.
You have a question about burrowing owls.
Yeah. I see. How are burrowing owls doing in Minnesota? Burrowing owls are considered Minnesota's only endangered owl species. So they historically have been only in the really far western counties. So we wouldn't get burrowing owls where we are. But the last documented sighting was in 2016. So they're not really around. And we think a lot of that is habitat loss, because they don't dig their own burrows. So they have to use badger dens, or, I mean, out west they can use prairie dog dens, but we don't have prairie dogs in Minnesota. So badger dens are the main places that they would use to nest in. And people don't tend to like animals that make holes in the ground. So they kill them, and they collapse the burrows, and so there's not a lot of places for the burrowing owls to go. It is a really tricky thing to fix as well, because burrowing owls they're kind of opportunists when it comes to nesting location, because some of them are migratory, and some of them will go all the way up into Saskatchewan in the summer. But if they're migrating south, and then on the way back they stop in Colorado, and they're like, "Ooh, I got a cool burrow in Colorado. I don't have to go all the way up to Saskatchewan. I'm not going to do that." So they just stay. So they do these little short stops instead of going all the way back. So they're not necessarily replenishing themselves very easily. So, and actually, if you're looking for a burrowing owl information, David Johnson is a great researcher who's doing a lot of work over in, I don't remember if it's Oregon or Washington. He's on the Umatilla Army base, and he's doing work with burrowing owls. So he's doing some pretty cool stuff out there.
Well, I think that's it, Joe. Is there?
Oh, I see. Will you continue to Zoom the international owl researchers? So in 2020, a lot happened, but when we were actually closed over the winter, and so we were trying to figure out, what do we do? How do we get more people to learn about owls while we're not open? So we started doing an owl expert speaker series, and so we were inviting owl people from all over the world to come and do talks like this one. Actually, David did one of those presentations just like this one during our series, and we just put out Zoom programs, and they were free, and people would sponsor them. And we did that again the following year, and we're hoping to do a few of them this year. Now that we're open again, it's hard to fit those into our normal schedule of in-person programs, but we do hope to have some of those. We do have quite a few, at least a dozen, maybe up to 24 of those programs up on our YouTube channel if you want to watch them. They're incredibly cool, very interesting stuff. We learned a ton of stuff as well.
Altacal we have a banding program for solid owls.
Okay.
Project Owl.
Cool. I actually just did I just did a raptor training course about 2 weeks ago where I learned how to do saw-whet owl banding, and that was a lot of fun. But one of the souvenirs I got was actually this. I got a little band that I'm wearing as an ear cuff because it's cool and I'm a nerd.
Nothing nerdy about that. Not in this group.
Well, I guess maybe this is time to say goodnight. And oh my gosh, we totally enjoyed this. And now we know how to do this hybrid Zoom. We've got all the kinks worked out with you. So anyway, thanks again. I give her a round of applause. And we'll be talking.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.